Hi, and welcome to the Changing Perspectives podcast, the show where we discuss a variety of topics including grief, parenting, health and wellness, and relationships. Join us and explore a number of changing perspectives. We are your hosts, Jenni and Josh Brennan. Hey there, Jenni.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm tired.
You're tired?
I'm very tired, yeah.
You're exhausted.
I am, but I'm still showing up. I'm here.
You're here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be honest, you look a little tired.
Yeah.
It's okay. You've got a sleeping beast next to you there. He looks pretty tired too.
Yeah,
Mr.
hopefully
Everett.
He won't snore on this episode as he did a few episodes
He did
ago.
make his presence known with a little snoring.
Yeah.
Do they make doggy CPAPs, do you think?
Probably.
Probably.
Yeah.
He might need one.
He may. We'll see. To be determined.
So we're at episode 12.
We are.
Yeah. Just a shout out. We have continued to get lots of great support from everybody. I think we're getting all kinds of new listeners all the time, so it's fun. And
actually, I think that is partially the reason we're doing today's topic is because we're getting also very specific, not necessarily feedback, but people reaching out in need of support and resources. So There was a lot of response to, I think it was episode 2 and 3, where we talked about preparing children for wakes and funerals and helping children with pet loss, and folks looking for some more sort of general information about what grieving children and teens need in the way of support. So that is our topic for today. And it did derive directly from people's, not viewers, listeners, reaching out to us for some additional resources and supports.
Excellent. Mm-hmm. So children's grief, do you want to give us a sort of, I guess, what's the biggest concern when it comes to being a parent of a child who has experienced a loss? What's the first thing that comes to mind or the biggest concern?
That children do, in fact, grieve too. And I think so often parents, adults tend to think that children are resilient, and they are. They're extremely resilient. And their grief looks very different than our grief. And so it often can very easily look to adults that children are fine, that they're doing fine, that they don't need information. They don't really need anything. They'll let us know if they need something, but really they can just play and handle it. And we'll talk about it when they're older. And that's really quite the opposite of what they need. Children do, in fact, grieve. And they have very specific needs. So today we're going to be walking through 7 of those sort of most basic needs that they have.
So and I don't want to jump ahead or anything, but let me just ask another question real quick. I guess, why is it that adults kind of have there's an opportunity for them, a chance that they won't see the child grieving? Is it because they grieve differently?
Yes. And yes, because children grieve differently, but also because in most cases where a child is grieving, the important adults in their life are also grieving. Mm-hmm. And so those adults have a bit of grief brain and don't necessarily see the signs.
And we've talked about
grief.
That concept before, grief brain, where the front part of your brain shuts off, right?
Right, essentially.
Okay.
I'm now being invaded by another dog right now.
Yep. You are surrounded by pit bulls.
Yes.
You are.
I am.
We've let that cat out of the bag, so to speak. Yeah, we rescue pit bulls in this family.
We have a problem.
Yeah.
We can't say no.
So I just wanted to say, I think you're going to hear a lot of the same concepts and themes that we've talked about in previous podcasts where, like you had mentioned, preparing children for funerals and wakes, pet loss, and also we talked in, I don't remember. Now, we're doing this so much, I don't remember the episode numbers, but we talked about what not to say to people when they've experienced a loss. So you're going to hear, I guess, similar themes, but we're going to do on this one a little bit more of a deeper dive into the topic of how children grieve, right?
That is correct. This new dog that is with me right now is much noisier.
Yes, she is.
She takes a few minutes to get settled.
So Lola has made her presence known.
Yeah, Lola is our child. She's our baby right now.
She's flanked No, Jenni is flanked by 2 pit bulls.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So back on track here.
Yes. So item number 1, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Let's dive in. That is information.
Yeah. And I didn't order this list in terms of most important to least important. I think they're all pretty equally important, but I do think this one sort of serves as a foundation, information. Adults tend to underinform children. Mostly because they want to protect them, right? So they don't want to give them information that's going to be hurtful. They don't want to stress them out. And so they protect them from a lot of the information by just not giving them any information. From something as sort of big as information around the fact that a person has died to something as specific as how they have died.
Right.
And and all of these are based in research. So what the research has shown is that children actually fare better when they have information as specific as possible. And the rule of thumb with kids is you always want to be honest with them. You don't want to lie, because if you lie to them, at some point, I promise you, it may not be until they're an adult, they will find out that you lied to them. And then that will make it difficult for them to trust you. And it will make them question so much other stuff that you have told them and done with them. So it's really important that you don't lie, especially when it's around something like this.
Well, you've got trust issues if they catch you or they realize that you didn't give them all the information.
Because children need to feel safe with the adults in their life. So lying, especially about a death, is going to come back and hurt everybody. Now, I understand that depending on a child's age, there's some information that they're just not ready to hear sometimes. I get that. There's a way to tell them the truth without oversharing. So you meet them where they're at developmentally. You tell them the basics of what they need to know and what they can understand. And then as they get older or as they start to ask more questions, you fill in those blanks for them. But you never catch yourself in a lie with them.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, so kids need that information. And the reason they need it is because they're children. And so children have this wonderful ability to be magical thinkers. So they think that there's real magic in the world. And for those of you that believe in magic out there, I'm not saying there isn't. I'm saying there's nothing quite like what a child believes in, where they can kind of really believe anything is possible. Right. And that can also work against them. So if they know someone has died and they're not being told the details around it and they're interested in it and they're asking and the adults are telling them things like, oh, you don't need to know, or I don't know, children, especially younger children, are going to use their magical thinking brains and they're going to come up with a solution on their own. They're going to fill in the blanks. And usually when they fill in the blanks, it's worse than the actual reality of the situation.
Right. Can you give us maybe an example of how you might explain to, let's say, now children understand death differently based on their age?
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
I guess before I make you and I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you to give us a language example. You should see the way she's looking at me. Maybe we should do Facebook Live.
Well, the look is because now Lola has left the room and is in the other room chewing loudly on a bone. Oh, I'm hoping it's a bone.
I don't even hear her.
Yeah, I do. So that was what the look was for.
Oh, I see. I thought you were upset that I was going to put you on the spot. So before we ask you to give us a language example, can you give us a quick rundown of how children understand death? Now, I know we talked a little bit about this in Wakes and Funeral episode. It depends on the age,
right,
on how they understand what death is and what it means.
Right. Exactly.
Right. Okay. So younger...
What are you asking me? What is the specific question here?
So can you give us maybe an example of how you would be clear and specific to, let's say, an 8-year-old about someone who just died, say, of cancer? So
I always, and the research shows that it's best to actually use the words we're least comfortable with. So actually saying the word died, and dead.
Right.
We're so reluctant to say those words in our society when it actually relates to actual death. Like we say dead and died all the time. Like the battery's dead. I'm dead tired. Right. But when we're talking about someone who's died, we tend to avoid saying died. Can you off the top of your head, think of some ways we might say someone has died without actually using that word.
Passed away.
Passed away.
That's a big one.
Has moved on, is in heaven, is sleeping forever, is no longer with us, lost their battle, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So parents and adults tend to use that kind of language with children, thinking that it's softer for them, that it's easier for them to digest. What it actually does, especially for children who are really pre-adolescents and younger, or maybe a little bit younger than pre-adolescents, it's confusing for them because they are concrete thinkers. They can't understand that sort of abstract kind of thought process. It's black and white to them. So if you say someone has passed away or we lost grandpa, they're going to actually think that you lost someone, or that they were walking by your house and they passed it. P-A-S-S-E-D? Yes.
Yes.
They're going to be confused. And so using something specific like the word dead or died and defining what that means is going to help them understand what death actually is.
Right.
If you say that things like God took your mom because he needed another angel, I get that that's probably your spiritual and religious language. But what that does for children of a young age is make them potentially fearful that, well, what if they need another angel? What if God needs another angel? Is he going to take me? Is he going to take my dad? Is he going to take someone else who's a parent figure for me? What's going to happen? There's still going to be that fear and that anxiety that's very likely for children, even if you use the words dead, died, but it's going to be much more minimized. And what you're going to do when you use words like that is make it much clearer for children so that they don't fill in the blanks with their magical thinking. So when I say children need information, what I'm talking about is they need clear, specific, black and white information.
I feel like you can use those colloquial terms with other adults because other adults have a base knowledge of what death is.
What does colloquial mean?
Like commonly used.
Sayings?
Yeah, exactly. Sort of, I guess, the term zeitgeist, like the common zeitgeist of what you say when someone passed away.
Oh.
So anyway. I
scored better on my math SATs than my...
I actually did pretty good in English.
Yeah, there we
math
go.
is, See, we compliment each other.
We do compliment each other. Mm-hmm.
You made me lose my train
I'm
of thought.
so sorry.
That's okay.
You were still I'm trying to get through the first bucket here, which is information.
We always hang out in the first one. That's kind of our thing now, I think.
Because it takes me that long to kind of corral you and get you focused.
No, I just had...
So colloquial terms.
So you can use those terms with other adults because they understand death. They understand what death is. So you can say she passed away.
That's true. But I actually
clicks.
say me as a grief therapist. I'm so sorry. I'm froggy today. Me as a grief therapist would say, or I as a grief therapist would say that you still should not be using those terms with adults, because if you listened to one of our previous episodes sort of about what not to say to grieving individuals, using those terms minimizes the loss to adults as well. And it's helpful for adults as they're moving through their grief process to really not accept, but to really kind of help them understand and process that their loved one is dead, to hear those words. Those words are helpful. Right. So that's just my little aside there.
And we talk about that in my field too, when we talk to families about donation.
That we shy away as a society from the word dead, died, dying, but really they're quite important terms to use. Okay. So I would say even with adults, but definitely with children, they need to hear your grandfather died last night. And they need to kind of hear why, because again, with their magical thinking.
Talk about the event, talk about the death.
Talk about physically what's going on with the body and what's no longer going on with the body. And as kids get older, they sort of reach a point in their time, sort of late elementary school, where they actually get really interested in this part, like what happens to the body. Right. And so you can really kind of lean into that then. But talking about what specifically led to the death is helpful, because children get really afraid when they learn about a death of anybody, and when they start kind of understanding that people around them who are important can die. But because of their magical thinking, and because they tend to be very self-centered and selfish individuals, as they should be, they very easily can assume that they did something to cause the death.
Right.
So even something that they thought, they might think that they caused the death. Oh, because I was mad at my dad this morning for, eating all of the Fruit Loops, then that's why he died. Or because I was bad and I yelled at my brother today, that's why my grandfather died. That's
especially if it's a sudden death.
Yeah, I think either way. Well, yes. So if it's a death that they're just learning about, if it's a death where like they had cancer and the family wasn't telling the child about it, it's still going to be a sudden death
for them,
for the child.
Okay. You are getting overrun by animals right now.
Now there is 3.
There really is 3. There's a cat behind you.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. We should have Facebook Lived this one.
Yeah, this would have been interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so let's move on. Tip number.
So let's just recap information.
Yes.
So children need clear, specific information about the death, about what caused the death, and about kind of what the next steps are going to look like for them.
So this is list of children's needs. So
yes.
Okay, so that was need number 1. Need number 2 is reassurance.
Correct. So as I was saying, children can tend to very easily feel fear after learning about a death, that they're going to die based on sort of where they are developmentally. They might start to have that feeling, or that other loved ones that are important to them are going to die. But also they tend to have a lot of feelings of guilt that they somehow caused the death, or that they were not good to that person. And those feelings need to be addressed and reassured, and children need an opportunity to express them. When a child has lost someone who's that significant to them, that adults in their life are probably also grieving. And so they're not necessarily very easily able to make space for children to talk about and express those feelings. But it's really important that those children have that opportunity.
Right, exactly. That's huge. And because that directly affects the way their grief, how they're able to process their grief, those giving them clear, specific information, but also reassuring them about those fears.
Yeah. And
it allows them to actually grieve and mourn.
It does. It doesn't minimize it for them. It creates space for conversation. Now, the tricky part, or one of the tricky parts, is that kids are not like adults, right? So they're not going to come and say, I really want to spend the next hour talking about my grandfather who just died. They're not going to. It's going to happen in sort of bits and like snippets here and there, little like 2-minute segments. And it might be that you're in the middle of playing basketball in the driveway with them, like a little Tykes hoop or something. And they ask 2 questions about the death, and then they tell you about their new sneakers. And then they ask you what's for dinner. And then they ask another question about the dead body. And then they talk about their favorite TV show. It could be like that. And that's hard for adults because it catches you off guard.
Right.
And you've got to be willing and able to kind of weave in and out of this grief talk. You're not diving all the way in. You're just kind of going in for a second, coming back out, and then they hit you again out of nowhere and you go back in. That's hard. So adults really need to be prepared for that. But set the tone, when you convey the information about the person who has died to the child and the circumstances around the death, you also then have to ask the child if they have any questions and say to them, when you want to talk about it, when you have questions about it, you can always ask me.
Right.
Or you can always ask this person, whoever it is that they can ask. So you set the stage for them that they can ask those questions. And I'll tell you that children are most likely to ask those questions in 2 places: in the car, especially for older children, and at night as they're going to bed. So whatever your bedtime routine is for a grieving child, really important that the adults around that bedtime routine understand that there's probably going to be some extra time that needs to be allotted for that. Because just as kids are, they're done brushing their teeth, they've read their books, everything's kind of quiet and calmer at night. They're settling in.
And they're thinking.
They're thinking. And that tends to be, and this with our kids, this has always been when they've had their biggest questions and sort of their realist conversations. Just as they're settling in, that's when those questions come about. And so adults need to be prepared for that. And the tendency is to be like, That's a big question for tonight. Why don't we talk about that tomorrow? And I get that as an adult. I get that. But they're not going to be ready to talk about it tomorrow. And the message you're sending when you say that is, don't talk about it tomorrow. Right. I'm not going to be ready.
I think an adult's tendency, too, is to want to talk about everything all together, all at once in one sitting.
Yes. And kids are going to zone out. They cannot do that. So you've really got to kind of let them drive the bus. So to get back to the information piece there, your information should meet them where they're at developmentally. So and you know your child, if their attention span is about 30 seconds to a minute, then you give them the very abbreviated version. And then as they get older, their attention span changes a little bit. But I wanted to go back to the older kids, the adolescents. And now the tweens, the sort of preteens, they can very easily access information.
Yeah.
So easily. You know, most 7-year-olds know how to conduct a Google search.
Well, it's part of school now. Technology at school is expanded since when we were little.
And so you might think as an adult, I'm not going to tell my child about this loss yet. They don't need to know yet. And it doesn't have to be a death-related loss. It could be anything, you know, especially those ones that are really, that get picked up by the media. I'm telling you, if you're out there and you find yourself in a situation where it's a sort of a high-profile case or a high-profile loss or a high-profile death, and you catch yourself saying, I'm not going to tell them yet, it's too late. Because if you've got kids who are at all tech savvy or who have friends, they're going to find out. And do you want them to find out because they've Google searched something or because they've stumbled across the local newspaper's website or a social media post that someone has shared or a friend at school has asked them about it? No, I don't think you do want them to find out that way.
Yeah.
Because that's going to send a message to the children that they weren't important enough to have that information. And then that they don't know that they can trust you and that we don't know that they have the correct story. And so I don't think we had to worry about this so much 30, 40 years ago because it was just sort of newspapers. But now think about it. You've got radio, you've got TV, you've got internet, you've got social media, you've got the unknowns of kids who may be friends with your kids whose parents may not be as tight-lipped and they talk about it and they share that information. You know, parents don't always think. I remember maybe 5 years ago or so, there was some incident that happened when our kids were both in elementary school, or maybe one wasn't in elementary school yet, but the schools were on lockdown. Something had happened, so the buses were delayed. And the messages from the school to all of the parents was that we didn't tell the kids what happened. Kids just thought the buses were late, but the parents knew what happened. And you weren't here. You were at work. So I don't know if you remember the story. So all of the parents were sitting at the bus stop waiting, and the bus was about 30 minutes late because of the issue that had gone on. So remember, the school hadn't told our kids anything, just that the buses were late. Parents had been sitting there with their kids, their elementary school kids, in lockdown, sort of afraid for a little bit of time. So there was heightened anxiety there at the bus stop. When the bus pulled up, what do you think happened? Do you think parents were like, okay, it's just a regular day, let's go back home? No. Nope. Some parents, as soon as the kids started getting off the bus, chose to tell their kids in front of other kids, earshot, what happened. Yeah. That's the world we live in right now. And I don't fault those parents at all. That was their anxiety. That was their like, oh, thank God my kid's here now. Everything's safe. That was a little bit of their brain not working, right? Because they had been in anxiety mode. That's the world we live in now. And we can't assume that other people are going to protect our children from information. So even though it's a difficult conversation to have sometimes, it's a much better conversation for your child to have with you than for your child to get the information from a stranger or from a friend or from a friend's parent or from like the person at Target. I mention Target a lot in these podcasts.
You do.
Target is my second home.
Are they sponsoring this podcast?
Maybe we should talk about it.
So just a couple of points. A lot of the time, our kids will be the first to tell us about a news story, right? Even local stuff too that happens in our town. They'll come out and say, I just saw this on Instagram or Snapchat.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. That's the world we live in. And so a lot of, for sure, if you've got kids that are teenagers, for sure that's happening. If you've got kids who are younger, it might be happening, especially if they have older siblings who are teenagers, right? So your younger children may not be on social media, but if they've got an older sibling who is, they're probably getting that same information. So really keep that in mind when you're thinking about the information piece and that reassurance, because that clear, specific, honest information can provide reassurance for children and can open the doors to communication. If you're not being open and honest about the information, then kids probably are not going to feel like they can come to you when they need reassurance.
I just wanted to make one more point. You had said that kids often will feel more comfortable communicating and sharing their thoughts at either bedtime or in the car, but also, especially if they're older, via text.
Yes, that's true.
Because we talked about that in the episode about parenting tweens and teens. Meeting them where they're at. But I think that tough conversations probably will happen or can happen over text.
Yeah. And I think also making sure that you're queuing into your older children's social media accounts at that time can be really important, because they might not be showing you physically any signs. But then if you're leaning into sort of their posts, you might see a very different story there. So it's a good way. It's another good sort of indication as to where your child is at.
All right. So need number 3 for children who are grieving is validation.
Right. So validation around their experience of grief. Children, if this is their first big loss, then grief is going to feel very new for them. And think about what it feels like for you as an adult. At times it can be overwhelming. It can be scary. It can be, I get people, just last night, a friend reached out to me that I hadn't talked to in a while and asked me questions around how they were feeling after a loss. And the question always is, am I crazy? Is this normal? Is there something wrong with me? And 9.9 times out of 10, the answer is no, you're not crazy. Yes, this is normal. And no, there's nothing wrong with you. So adults have those feelings too. Grieving children also have those feelings, but are in a much more complex state of development because they're kids. So they're still developing and changing and growing and trying to make sense of the world. And so when they have those feelings, it can be terrifying. And so what they need from the adults around them is really education about grief. If a child's like, my belly really hurts and I can't sleep, they might need some education around the fact that that's really normal when we're grieving the loss of someone. And so that's okay. Or when they're kind of acting bad, because those are the 3 sort of main behaviors for children. They either are expressing that they're mad, that they're sad, or they're having behaviors that make them look bad. So mad, sad, bad. Those are the 3 sort of big keywords for grieving children. Children are not actually bad. They're not being bad. They're grieving. And so their complicated feelings make them act out because life is hard when you're a child and you're grieving and you still have to do sort of the kid stuff. So education with them around the fact that, regression, if you've got sort of a school-age child who hasn't wet the bed in a long time and starts wetting the bed again after a significant loss, that's normal. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the child. That's normal grief. And
they're going to need you to not freak out on them for
exactly.
that.
And they're going to, depending on the age they're at, they may feel a lot of shame and embarrassment around that. And so they don't need the adults to reinforce that shame and embarrassment, but to just educate them on the fact that that's grief, that's grieving, it's normal, and it's not going to be forever. Those sort of symptoms are not going to be forever.
The other thing that comes into mind with validation is, letting them know that it's okay. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I could be.
I will.
Letting them know that it's okay, that they don't want to talk about it, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because families don't grieve together, right? We've talked about this on previous podcasts. You can lose the same member of the family and everyone's going to grieve that differently. So a child may not be angry about a loss at the same time that their parent is. Or they may not be crying at the same time that a parent is. That's okay. So letting them know that those, that grief is going to look different is also normal. You don't have to be sad at the same time that mommy is sad. You don't have to be angry at the same time that mommy is sad. What you're feeling is what you're feeling, and that's okay.
And going back to the information piece or the reassurance piece, when you say, okay, do you have any questions about grandpa's cancer? Mm-hmm. And then say, no, not right now. And letting them know that it's okay.
Right. It's okay to not
ready,
have questions.
I'm here to answer.
Right.
That ties into validation.
Right. Okay. And so the adults need to circle back around every once in a while and just kind of check in and say, did you have any questions now? Or don't forget, if you have any questions about it or you want to talk about anything, you can always ask me.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that was need number 4. I think we are on to children who are grieving.
That was 3.
Oh.
Information, reassurance, validation.
So now we're on to 4.
We are.
Okay. I transpose your lists to other formats, and it usually messes up the numbering, and I don't know.
Yeah, blame it on the computer. We learned the other day about why you can't count.
Don't. All right. Okay then. Opportunities to remember. That's need number 4.
Yeah. And we did sort of a whole podcast episode on this. Episode 2 is really about preparing children and teenagers for wakes and funerals and those processes. The reason we did a whole podcast on it is because it's really important for children to have opportunities to remember. And that's a very sort of formal ceremony, those wakes, those funerals. So definitely, if you haven't checked out episode 2, check that out.
Yes.
We talk more specifically and at length about those sort of formal commemorative ceremonies. But we did a whole episode on it because it's really important for children to have an opportunity and opportunities to remember their loved ones, to remember their special person, not just at the wake and the funeral, but sort of ongoing. A big fear for children is that, and this is a fear for adults too, but more so with children, is that they're going to forget their loved one because they had a shorter period of time with their loved one. So they're afraid they're going to forget how they smell, how they looked, how they sounded, what they used to do. And they're afraid that they're going to lose their memories of them. And so being able to sort of lean into those moments with the children is really important. So right. Both with formal ceremonies, but then also informal ceremonies, like creating a memory book, creating a memory wall, doing some sort of recording, like a video slideshow just for them of their memories. All of that kind of stuff is going to be really important for them.
Right. So can you talk a little bit about some of the other ways? So I want to tie this into some of the things we talked about in the episode about what not to say, and how, people forget or tend to not think about or talk about the person who died after the wake of the funeral.
Right.
And we're not just talking about at the anniversary or birthdays, but all that stuff in between. I think it's even more important for kids. And what are some of the ways that they can do that? Remember, I'll just jump in and share with you. When I was 12, we lost my grandmother.
Your grandmother died. You didn't lose her. You didn't bring her to Disney World and she got misplaced, right?
She died.
See, that's the kind of language that we use.
She died, and she died of cancer. And she was very, very special to me, very huge part of my childhood. I still talk about her all the time.
Right.
And one of the things, she was Italian, and we would hang out with her every Sunday. And one of my favorite memories of her, most cherished, is how amazing her food was.
Right.
And so there's certain smells that Italian food can have, or even the way it tastes, that ties me back into those memories, right?
Sure.
We were at Disney, and I think I got teary-eyed when we were at one of the Italian restaurants, and whatever I was eating tasted exactly like her cooking.
I have a vague memory of that. No, I don't remember the specific. I'm vaguely remembering that.
So I guess,
we were in Epcot, I feel like.
For kids, maybe cooking a meal that their grandmother are,
yes, for sure,
having those memories through aroma.
Yeah, no, right. I have. I've definitely worked with people who, I think for a lot of people, food is huge. And for those of you listening out there, I'm sure if you kind of think about someone important that you've lost, there might be a food connection there, especially if it was sort of a caretaker from sort of an older generation.
Right.
But I've known folks who, their loved one knew that they were dying, knew they were going to die, and so sort of froze a lot of meals, sort of their famous meals. And that brings a lot of comfort, right? That you've actually got Nani's meatballs in your freezer that you can take out for special things. But at some point you run out of those, and that's really sad. Or at some point you just can never bring yourself to unfreeze that final batch of meatballs from your grandmother. But yes, those are important ways to remember. They're intrinsically there, right? Mm-hmm. Those smells, all of those triggers a song on a radio can do that really quickly too. A changing of a season, just a kind of a bird chirping can take you instantly back to a memory of someone that you lost. And it's important to kind of lean into that and include the children in that process with you.
So you've got sort of those moments that are unexpected, like when I see a cardinal or something. Mm-hmm. She loved cardinals.
Right.
But what about structured opportunities to remember? What are some other examples of what you can do with kids? I know there's something you can do. You had given advice to one of our friends about a balloon, right?
Well, any sort of including them in any sort of time of the year that they would have been included. So holidays, mm-hmm. their birthdays, anniversaries of their death, things like that, rather than glossing over those days, finding a way to incorporate their memory into those days. So I know lots of people who on the dead individual's birthday or on the anniversary of their death will do something really specific. They'll go to the cemetery if they're buried and that's meaningful to them. Or they'll go somewhere pretty and they will plant a tree, or they will release a balloon into the air, which is actually not really good for the environment, but you got to weigh out sort of your your sort of mental health needs with the environment needs. Something like that.
There's a niche right there.
What?
Environmentally friendly helium balloons that you can release.
I bet there are some already. We'll have to do some Google searching and see. Same with those lanterns. Those lanterns are gorgeous, but I think, they pose beautiful. Fire risk as well. Right. But there's a need for that, right? There's this need to somehow acknowledge that they're there or that connection was there. So building some sort, you can make it your own. A lot of hospice agencies around the holiday season will have some sort of tree lighting ceremony where there'll be ornaments that are hung for people that have died or ornaments that are made. Anything really, you can be really creative, and a lot of places around the country, and not just in the United States. I think we have to stop talking just about the U.S. because I am seeing that we have quite a number of listeners who are not in the United States. So thank you for that.
That's so great.
So even overseas and in other countries, there's a need for this. There's a need to sort of lean into and commemorate your loved one. And so big is that need that we are starting to see children's grief centers pop up.
Yes.
So actual facilities and organizations who really promote understanding and providing support around children's grief. And so if you look at most of those children's grief centers or camps, there's a huge component of that centers around remembering their loved one, remembering their special person. So if it's a grief group or a grief center where they have sort of support groups that run on a weekly basis, usually some big component of each week's group focuses on that child sharing and their family sharing something about their loved one. Maybe it's their favorite pizza topping, or maybe it's their favorite ice cream, or maybe it's what was their favorite song. Or if you don't know what their favorite song is, what do you think their favorite song would be today on the radio? So it's really encouraging folks to lean into that. And why does that happen? Because it's so important for their kind of healing process. They don't want to forget their loved one. None of us do. who've experienced a loss, but for children, they really are terrified about forgetting their loved one. So we need to, as the adults in their life, help them remember that. We just saw this. We have someone very close to us who just, I almost said lost their dog, but again, didn't lose them, died. But their dog died recently. And it was they ordered a beautiful blanket with 100 photos of their dog. And one of their children was like, oh, now I can hug her whenever I want to. Yeah. And it was filled with memories of their loved one. You can do that with a human too, right? And it's something that the kids really, really benefit from because they're not gone. That person's memory is still with you in a way. There's sort of this ongoing connection. And at some point, we will do a podcast talking about sort of theories of grief and theories around coping after a death. I think everyone knows sort of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Did you ever learn that? Did you
yes.
ever? You did.
Yeah, part of my training in my field.
Yeah, forget it. It's pretty much useless.
I heard that too.
She actually came out at the end of her life and was like, you guys totally misunderstood what I was saying. You took my theory and made it this pathway that everybody sort of has to move through. That's not what I meant at all. There's tons of more theories, but a lot of the sort of modern and postmodern theories around grief and loss, they vary. But all of them have some sort of component that involves the importance of maintaining a connection to their loved one.
Right.
Some call it a continuing bond, an enduring connection, something that finds a way for that loved one that has died to still somehow be a part of your life, right? Maybe it is a tree. Someone who there's a tree in their front yard that very much makes them feel connected to their father. Yep. I have my grandmother's necklace that the story is, I think she got it when she was 16. I don't really know if this is a true story or not, but for me, that's a connection. And so when I wear that, it's very and it's this teeny tiny little necklace. It's probably worth $5, but it's a connection for me to my grandmother. And I think for those of you listening out there, is there something in your life that is that sort of continuing bond, that enduring connection for you with your loved one that you've lost?
It's an opportunity to remember.
It's an opportunity to remember. So we do it as adults. Children need that too, but children kind of need the permission and the sort of scaffolding to do that. They kind of need us to hold their hands because they can't just really walk into Target and be like, I'm going to do a memory box of my loved one. So I'm going to need to print out some photos and get some glue sticks. They need the adults to actually take the lead in this.
I might have to start taking you to a different store.
No, don't take away my Target.
I think you can ask the kids too, right? How do you want to remember? Or
absolutely.
What do you want to do?
And at the same time, be prepared to give them some suggestions because some people are just like myself, are not crafty, but you can Google. And I will I have a PDF document that I will put a link to in the show notes with some ideas about commemorative activities.
Awesome. A couple more quick points. I wanted to just lean into that little story you talked about, the dog who died, and just say, rest in peace, sweet Lily. We love Lily.
Okay.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but we might as well just shout her out.
Yeah.
And we'll miss her, sweet dog. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to say, can we shout out or mention a couple of those children's grief places that you mentioned?
No, but I will put a link just because we're just located here in Massachusetts. So I know the ones that are closest to us, but that's not going to help everybody else.
The ones I'm thinking of are local?
Yes.
Okay.
So I will post a link to Children's Grief Centers
perfect.
in the show notes as well. Do you have a pen and you can kind of write that down? So
I'm going to write it down with my laptop.
Oh, perfect. Why don't you not do that while you're supposed to be talking, though?
No, I'm going to do that after I announce what need number 5 is.
Okay, and then you're going to not listen to me, so I can say whatever I want. It looks like
pretty much. No, I'm always listening. Need number 5 is routine.
Right. So children really benefit from routine and structure, and the tendency is when there's a loss, when there's a death, to sort of allow the children to not have to lean into their routine. That's sort of how our society is built. Someone dies, you get bereavement days, so you don't have to go to work. You kind of get permission to not show up for your regular routine. And some kids may not need their routine. So these are generalized statements that the research sort of has demonstrated. But most children really benefit from continuing on with their daily routine. So even if it's a significant loss, most children fare better if they still, for example, go to school that same day, that next day. If they still go to their sports practices, their dance classes, their theater rehearsals, anything that's their routine.
You struggled for a minute with rehearsals.
I struggle with, I want to call sports uniforms. I want to call them costumes. Like all of that just gets jumbled.
You just jumble it all together.
It's all jumbled. They're like all synonyms for each other.
Okay.
But children, and that sounds crazy, right? Like, so Jenni, you're saying that a child could lose someone, like they could wake up on a Tuesday morning at 6 a.m., be told that like their favorite person in the world who was like their grandmother has died suddenly. And you're saying it's okay to send them to school? Yeah, absolutely. I'm saying that. If the child is okay with it and wants to go to school, they probably should go to school.
If that's what their need is.
If that's what their needs are. If they're really wanting to sort of lean into structure and comfort and being able to be somewhere where they know what's predictable, what's going to happen next, then send them. It's completely normal for them to need routine. Now, you've got to tell the people in that routine what's going on. So you've got to get on the phone and call the teacher and, you know, the coaches and the instructors, right? I'm trying to cover everybody. Friends, parents, what's going on so that they know what to expect. Because just even though they need routine, they still are going to be grieving during that process. And so they might look and act a bit off. And so you need the folks around them to kind of be prepared to handle that. Right. And they need to have an escape plan. Like you want to go to school? Totally fine. I will send you to school. If you need me to come and get you, you go to the nurse or you talk to your teacher and I will happily come and get you. So they have sort of an escape plan in a way. But routine is really important for them. So that's hard for adults because adults, when they have a loss, don't tend to lean into routine. They tend to focus on planning for the funeral and things like that.
Right.
But your children might actually need something quite different. They might need the routine. So they might still need dinner at the same time. They might still need to go to their practices. They might still need some of that kind of structure and order. That's because they're children. They're still grieving, but they're grieving in a different way. And that routine is important for them.
I also think the opposite is true if they don't want to, don't make them.
Right, exactly. So children, just as adults all grieve individually and grieve differently, children do too. So you may have 4 children in your house and they all may be very relatively close in age. And 2 of them may really want to go to school. They may say, I have to go to school. I can't miss school. I need to go to school. And the others may say, I don't want to go to school. I don't want my friends to see me crying. I want to be here. I want to help with the funeral. I want to help put together pictures. I just want to be with everybody. Meet them where they're at. So if that's what they need, then try to find a way to give them what they need.
Absolutely. Okay. So we have 2 needs left.
Okay.
Need number 6 is peer support.
Yeah. So this is hard because I want you all to take a minute and remember your middle school experience. Was it fun?
No.
For most people, I was leaving just sort of a silent pause for people to think.
I filled it.
You did. That's people's tendency is to fill the silence. But therapists like to sort of lean into the silence.
By the way, I went to junior high and not middle school.
Oh, right. So junior high, middle school. You don't have to get too personal, but do you remember why it wasn't really a good experience? In 2 words or less. Well, that's 1.
Can we be quite honest?
Okay.
So for me, it was kind of good.
That's fine. That's good.
Let's get real. I hit puberty first before anybody else. I got taller. I got more athletic. I was playing sports. I was on the football team. First girlfriend, all that stuff. It was only 2 grades for me, 6 and 7. Mm-hmm. And that was.
Okay. So it sounds like what made it good for you was social acceptance. That's kind of what I'm hearing you say, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you hit puberty. So it's like the way you're talking.
Are you going to charge my insurance with this?
The way that you're talking and sort of your body language there, like you literally like puffed up your shoulders and you were like, yeah, you did. You were like proud of yourself because you were socially accepted.
Right.
Right.
Yes, it was huge.
So social acceptance is really hard during adolescence. And if you're not socially accepted, then that's when things can go really south for folks.
Yep.
So think about the importance of that. Like it's all kind of about social acceptance and so much weighs upon how your peers are going to treat you. The thing is that kids have no idea how to support each other around grief. Like adults don't really know how to support each other around grief. Kids do an even worse job. Again, I'm generalizing. There certainly are some children who just instinctively are great at it or come from households maybe where it's talked about more and they've learned it. But the vast majority of children are uncomfortable around it. And what do children do when they're in an uncomfortable situation? This is actually a question.
They lash out.
They lash out. They make fun of. They try to make it funny. So
yeah.
It's really common when children lose someone, especially someone important like a parent, that their peers will mock them, will make fun of them. That's the girl whose mom died. That's the boy whose grandfather just died and he cried the other day. That is totally normal. It's appropriate developmentally appropriate. Yeah, behavior from children. Like it makes sense why they're doing it. It definitely needs to be addressed and sort of scaffolded, and it's a learning moment, but it happens, and it happens all the time. So children need peer support when they're grieving, but the problem is that their peers often aren't very equipped at giving them appropriate support. Right. So it's a huge need for them. A lot of research shows this. And as children get older and move more into adolescence and closer to adolescence, peer support becomes one of the most important needs, yet their peers are the most unequipped at that time to provide that support for them. So parents might actually need to look out elsewhere for peer support for their children. And this is where those children's grief centers can come in handy, because what that allows and what that provides for children is regular, maybe it's every week, maybe it's like a week or two every summer, or weekend camps where they get to be with other children who are grieving, other children who have shared similar experiences, other children who need to have opportunities to remember their loved ones, to sort of grieve their loved ones. And that's not going to happen naturally. That's going to take the adults in the child's life seeking that out.
Right.
A lot of them are free of charge, or, maybe only ask for a nominal donation fee, or might be able to actually utilize insurance benefits. But it's a huge, huge need for grieving children out there is support from other grieving children.
Absolutely.
But that's a hard one. It's an important one, and it's a hard one.
Especially if the kids want to keep their routine. Right. That's part of what they need to keep their routine, go to school, go to practice, whatever.
Right. They sort of they want to feel normal. They don't want to do anything that's going to make them look different than, because that's a hard part of adolescence too, when you're different than other people. So if you're the kid whose mom died, and these are real things that I've heard from friends, that I've heard from clients, that I've heard from students, like these are real things that kids say to each other.
So we have an upcoming episode on grief in school.
Yes.
Right? So I think this will probably come up a lot in there. Like
it is actually. Yeah. I'm still currently, there's so much data that's sort of fresh, raw data that's coming in from current teachers. And so we'll fold that into that episode on children's grief in the classroom. So it'll be based on sort of current research, by academics who are out there doing controlled studies, but then also information that we're receiving from our listeners who are actively working in the school system right now.
Good job. You said listeners, not
did.
viewers.
I don't know if you caught my pause. I had to pause to make sure I got the right word.
All right. So the final need for children who are grieving is modeling. Need number 7.
Yeah. And this probably is the most challenging for adults. What I'm talking about is letting your children see you grieve.
That's tough.
That's hard.
Yeah.
And I get that. And I acknowledge that, because what I'm saying is for many of you, do the opposite of what you've been taught to do, which is to be strong and not let them see you cry and to keep it all together. No, well, no one should ever be strong. And if you listened to our previous episodes,
Right.
you know that that's another sort of bone of contention for me. But children need to see normal grief. So we talked about one of the needs that children have is for their grief to be normalized, to be sort of validated. The best way for that to happen is for them to see it in action, for them to see like, oh, my mom can be crying and really sad about the loss, but then she's okay. Like, I get to see her friends or other family members support her. I get to hear what she's saying. I get to see her be really broken.
Yeah.
And then I get to see her kind of pull out of it and be happy as well. And that's really powerful for children to see that, like, okay, when I feel that way, I don't have to feel so crazy. I don't have to feel so guilty or so shameful because I saw my mom do that, or I saw my aunt do that, or I saw my grandfather do that.
Right.
Really important for you men out there. Okay. And I think the tides are changing, but there's probably a lot of you who are, I'd say, over the age of 30, who probably have never seen the men that are older than you, the generations before you, cry a whole heck of a lot. I had a patient come to me once who was I think he was in his late 70s, and he had so much shame because he cried at his dad's funeral when he was 60. So his dad was like 90 and he was 60 when his dad died. And he cried at his dad's funeral, not like on the floor, sobbing, hysterical, inconsolable, which also is normal grief, and that would have been okay. Like, he had some tears rolling down his cheek, and he felt so guilty because as a culture, the culture had conditioned him so much that men should not cry
be tough
at all, be tough, be strong. And so he felt so guilty for years that he had shed some tears at his father's funeral. So it's hard. It's so hard for people in the male role out there, especially older males, to cry. Really important, though, for your children, especially male children, to see that it's okay, that it's not a sign of weakness. So to you adults out there who may be suffering from a grief, a death-related loss, who are feeling the pressure of trying to hide it from your children, you don't have to. It's okay to model it for them. Now, you have to label it, and reassure them, like, I'm crying because I'm really sad about grandma dying. It's not anything you did. I'm going to be okay. This is just what happens when people lose someone sometimes, and it's okay. And then you can circle back around to it. Like, do you have any questions? I know you saw me cry last night. Was it scary for you? Do you ever get that way? Like, use it as an opportunity to talk about your loss, about your feelings with your kid. But I get that it's hard, but I'm telling you to lean into that.
Lean into it.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm seeing is these list of 7 needs are interconnected.
Yes.
And you can be addressing modeling at the same time you're addressing validation,
Correct.
information, all that. So let's go ahead. That was the last need. So let's go ahead and recap real quick.
Okay.
So the first need is information, giving them clear and specific information with clear definitions about what happened.
And using the word dead and died as much as you can. And I'm not saying like, your dad died. Like, let's not overuse it, but just instead of things like passed away or like you said, I lost my grandma. Mm-hmm.
The next need is reassurance, addressing their guilt that they were somehow involved or fear that they're going to die too.
Right. Okay. But also fear that no one's going to be able to take care of them too, especially if it was a caregiver role. Children can fear their own safety. Like, who's going to buy my clothes now? And this is a real fear I've heard from a child before after losing their mom. Their mom was the one who went shopping for them. So who's going to buy? How am I going to get food? How am I going to get clothes now? A very practical concern for a 7-year-old, right? It may sound like, oh my God, that's what you miss of your mom. You don't know who's going to feed you now or bring you clothes. That's a 7-year-old for you. They're of course they loved their mom, but they're very practical, sort of concrete thinkers. Mm-hmm. My mom bought me food and bought me clothes. Oh my God.
So
now what? So reassuring
that their bellies will be full and they won't be naked.
That they're still, or generally that they're still going to be cared for.
Yes.
That the adults around them are going to take care of their needs.
So reassurance. The next need is validation.
Right. Around their feelings related to the loss.
It's okay to grieve that way or not grieve in that moment. The next is opportunities to remember.
Yep.
Routine.
Yes.
peer support, and finally modeling.
Right. And with peer support and modeling probably being the most challenging for a lot of adults, and peer support really requiring the highest level of outside resources. So we will put resources and links in the show notes. And also you can go to my website where there will be even more resources. I am limited in the show notes in terms of characters. So
yes.
If you're feeling like you'd like more resources, you certainly can reach out to me as well. But you can head on over to jennibrennan.com to the resources page.
Do you have any final thoughts for us today?
Just to lean into this, these are all kind of things that are okay to talk about with kids ahead of time too. Before there's a big loss, it's okay to talk about death and grief. And, if you listen to our Disney episode or our last episode on sort of death in the Marvel Cinematic Universe too, there's a lot of opportunities to see death and grief in our entertainment, just children's entertainment out there. Those are opportunities to talk about it and talk about, what do you think that kid in that movie would need, when they were sad, things like that. So talk about it. Don't wait until the loss happens. Talk about it ahead of time. So that would be my tip.
Excellent. And my final thought is that children grieve too.
They do. Yes.
Yeah, and don't forget it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that is going to do it for today. Thank you guys so much for listening. Like Jenni said, you can learn more on this by checking out changingperspectivesblog.com. We're going to put all kinds of resources in the show notes as well. Don't forget, Changing Perspectives is releasing 2 episodes a week on Mondays and Thursdays. And as a reminder, this episode was for education and entertainment purposes only. Should you need additional support, please contact your healthcare provider for information and referrals. Please follow us on Facebook at Changing Perspectives Podcast and on Instagram at Changing Perspectives Blog. Go ahead and check out that website we talked about, changingperspectivesblog.com, and send us an email to changingpodcast@gmail.com. Please go ahead and subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode, and we will see you next time. Say bye, Jenni.
Bye, Jenni.
The Changing Perspectives podcast is produced, recorded, and edited by Dizzy-Bird Studios, Whitman, Massachusetts. Visit Dizzy-Bird Studios on Facebook, facebook.com/DizzyBirdStudios.
We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. My name is Taylor Eland, and I host a show called Just Think, where I look into philosophy, theology, and other scientific ologies to figure out the underlying workings of an argument. If you would like to learn something new every week while getting both sides of a theory, go ahead and check us out on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Music, and Google Podcasts, along with various other networks on Sundays.